The sun was already hiding behind the mountains when the sound of a mournful cattle call tore through the silence of the backlands. It was a tired horse voice, laden with memories that time had tried to erase, but couldn't. That song came from Seu Antero, an old cowboy with calloused hands and a gaze lost on the horizon. He was there, mounted on the same horse that had accompanied him for over 30 years, his leather hat already faded by the sun, and his heart heavy with something he had never dared to say aloud. The wind blew through the dry branches of the caatinga, carrying the scent of hot earth and longing. Each step of the horse raised dust that mingled with memories of a time when the Sertão still smiled at him. Today, all that remained was the distant echo of what was once called life. And in the midst of that silence, something seemed different. There was an anguish in the air, as if the Sertão itself sensed that something was about to happen. The villagers still remember when Seu Antero was the first to wake up. Even before sunrise, he was already up, tending to the cattle, singing to the oxen as if conversing with old friends. They said he had the gift of understanding the hearts of animals, and perhaps that was why he always preferred their company to that of men. Life never gave him much, but he always gave back with everything he had: strength, faith, and an immense love for the land where he was born. But time has the cruel gift of taking away everything we think is forever. The farm where he worked his whole life changed owners. The old bosses were gone, the new ones barely knew his name. The fences were replaced, the corrals renovated, and the old cowboy was left aside, like a forgotten portrait on a mud wall. Even so, he remained there, firm, as if his body were made of the same dust that covered the ground. No one knew for sure what kept him there. Perhaps it was the memory of the woman he loved and lost, or the smell of rain falling on dry earth, reminding him of happy days. Perhaps it was simply the fear of leaving and realizing that the world outside no longer had room for men like him. What is known is that despite the pain, Seu Antero never complained. When someone asked him if he didn't feel tired, he would simply smile and say, "Tired? Tired is the one who has nowhere to return to. I have the backlands." That afternoon, however, something inside him felt different. The cattle call, which had always sounded firm, now came out trembling, almost like a cry for help. His eyes, once full of courage, were now brimming with tears. The old cowboy knew that time was taking its toll, and deep down, he felt that this might be the last sunset he would see from the top of the hill where he had so often herded cattle. The orange clouds seemed to weep along with him, while the distant sound of a bell echoed from the abandoned chapel. Each chime brought back memories of a past that would never return. The wind, as if taking pity, caressed Seu Antero's wrinkled face, whispering stories that only the heart understands. And it was there, amidst the chirping of crickets and the last glimmer of light, that he murmured softly, almost voicelessly, "Even the wind has forgotten my name." The silence that followed was profound, heavy, almost sacred. It seemed as if the entire backlands held its breath, waiting for what would come next. And perhaps it was at that moment that the old cowboy, unknowingly, began his final journey, a story that no one told, but that time could never silence. When the sun rose behind the mountains, gilding the stones and making the cracked earth shine like gold, Antero was still just a boy. He wore a leather hat bigger than his head, had bare feet, and a look that mixed innocence and courage. From an early age, he learned that in the backlands, those who sleep too much lose their bread, and that the land, however dry it may seem, always rewards those who treat it with respect. His father, Seu Romão, was a man of few words and many calluses. He always said, "Son, work is what makes a man valuable, and his word is what makes him respected." Antero grew up listening to the sound of hoes hitting the ground, the lowing of cattle at dawn, and the cowboys' calls cutting through the wind. Back then, the backlands were harsh, but there was a simple beauty in each sunrise. Neighbors helped each other, shared the little water they had, and on full moon nights, families gathered around the fire to listen to old stories, stories of courage, faith, and promises that time could never erase. And in the midst of it all, little Antero dreamed. He dreamed of owning his own land, a piece of ground where he could plant, harvest, and raise his children with dignity. He dreamed of seeing cattle grazing under a clear sky without having to ask any boss for favors. He dreamed of building a little white house for the girl who made his heart beat faster, Rosa, the blacksmith's daughter. She had hair as black as night and a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire backlands. When they met at the village store, a single glance was enough to make time stand still. He, shy, could barely utter a word, but deep in his heart, he cherished the dream of one day calling her his wife. Time passed, and the boy grew into a man. The hat, which had once been too big, now fit perfectly on his head, which the sun stubbornly punished. The days were long, the heat unbearable, but Antero didn't complain. With each lassoed cattle, with each fence repaired, he felt he was building something, even if he didn't yet know what. The backlands taught him that life is made of small victories, a calf saved from drought, an unexpected rain, a smile exchanged at the end of the day. Antero's hands grew steady, his body grew accustomed to fatigue, and his heart learned to wait. He believed that everything in life had its time, and that God did not forget those who fought honestly. During the St. John's festivities, he danced with Rosa under the colorful flags, dreaming of the day he would have enough to ask her to marry him. The two made simple plans: a life in the countryside, a yard full of chickens, 2 children running around in the yard, and a faithful dog guarding the door. But the backlands, however beautiful they were also unpredictable. Years of severe drought came, times when the land turned to dust and the cattle died of hunger. Many left in search of work in the cities, but Antero stayed. He said the backlands were stubborn, but so was he. And it was during this difficult time that fate showed him the weight of the word sacrifice. His father, Romao, fell ill, and the young cowboy took on the responsibility of the household. He worked from sunrise to sunset, cared for his mother, helped his neighbors, and even exhausted, still found the strength to dream. Once Rosa asked him, her eyes welling up with tears, "Antero, have you ever thought about leaving here?" He smiled, wiped the sweat from his brow, and replied, "And leave the backlands? Me? No. If God made me be born here, it's because He has a purpose for me." His faith was greater than the drought, greater than the hunger, greater than the fear. And perhaps that's why the people respected him so much. They said that wherever Antero put his hand, the work prospered. Wherever he passed, the cattle obeyed. It was as if he had a gift, the gift of understanding the silence of the backlands, of conversing with the wind and drawing hope even from the stones. Over time, he achieved what seemed impossible. He bought a small piece of land, a simple place, but full of life. He built a mud brick house with his own hands and planted an umbu tree in front of it, saying that it would be the symbol of his family. Rosa agreed to marry him, and the entire backlands seemed to celebrate their love. The chapel bells rang, the cowboys celebrated, and even the sky that day filled with clouds, a harbinger of rain, a sign of blessing. But fate, that capricious old thing, never lets happiness last long. They had barely begun their married life when the drought returned stronger than ever, and what had been a dream began to turn into a struggle. The cattle disappeared, the earth cracked, and what little they had was shared with those who had less. Even so, Antero did not lose heart. He said that the man of the backlands does not live on abundance, he lives on faith. And every night beside his wife, he would look at the starry sky and say, "Rosa, you can write this down. One day, the backlands will smile at us again." And you who are listening to this story, do you believe that a man's faith can change destiny? Comment below. I believe in the strength of the backlands. If your heart also feels the weight and beauty of these words, I want to see how many still believe that love and work are the greatest riches anyone can have. But time is a wind that doesn't warn when it changes direction. And it was on one of those days, when the sun seemed to burn hotter than ever, that Antero's life began to take a turn he never imagined. The years passed like the warm wind that blows at the end of the afternoon, carrying with it the dust of the backlands and the dreams that once seemed so certain. Antero, now with a face marked by deep wrinkles and hands hardened by time, was no longer the young man who defied the sun with an open chest and a heart full of hope. His body, once agile, began to show signs of weariness. His steps became slower, his gaze more tired, and even the horse, companion of so many journeys, seemed to feel the weight of the days. But he didn't stop. He never stopped. The sun was rising, and there he was, with his worn leather hat, his jacket torn at the elbows, and the same cattle call that the backlands already knew by heart. "Get up, boy," he told himself, even when his back ached and his legs trembled. "The cattle don't wait." And there he went, stumbling among the stones, firm in his purpose to care for what he always believed to be his mission: the land, the animals, the work. Because for Antero, work wasn't just an obligation. It was the way he found to continue existing. Life had taken so much from him: his youth, his health, and in time, even Rosa, who left us too soon, taken by a fever that not even the village doctor could cure. It was a hard blow. For days, the old cowboy remained silent. Sitting by the umbu tree he had planted on his wedding day, the leaves fell onto the dry ground, and each one seemed to carry away a piece of his soul. But even in his grief, he did not give up. "She wouldn't want to see me standing still," he would say, wiping his face with his sweaty arm before heading to the corral. Work became his companion. Each cow that calved, each calf saved, each fence repaired was a silent conversation between him and God. And even when the farm passed into the hands of new owners, city people who had never stepped in the mud or smelled the barnyard, Antero stayed. They promised they would let him take care of the land, that he would have a place to live until the end of his days. He believed. He always believed. After all, a man who lived by his word cannot imagine that someone could lie while looking him in the eye. But the world had changed. The backlands were no longer the same, and the new landowners saw no value in history, only in profit. Machines began to occupy the space of men, and the cattle, once herded by cattle calls, were now driven by the noise of engines. Antero watched everything with a heavy heart. He still tried, with his already diminished strength, to lasso an ox or care for a sick calf. But his hands trembled, and his body exacted the price of so many years of effort. One morning, while trying to lift a sack of corn, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He staggered, leaned against a post, and took a deep breath, trying to hide the pain. No one saw. No one asked. And yet, he returned to work the next day, as if nothing had happened. While time passed, he believed that today's sweat would be tomorrow's rest, but tomorrow never came. The old cowboy began to realize that the world moved on without looking back. His eldest son, Zeka, had left for the city in search of a real job. The youngest, Miguel, hardly ever appeared. He said the backlands were a place of suffering, and Antero, alone, remained steadfast, feeding the animals and talking to them as one speaks to old friends. Sometimes he would stroke the horse's neck and murmur, "You see, people change, but the cattle still understand me." The nights grew longer, the cold more biting. The fire in the wood stove no longer warmed as it once did. Food was scarce, money almost non-existent, but he still shared what he had with those who came asking for help. "That's just how life is," he would say. "Some have too much, others too little. The important thing is not to lose your good heart." And even when his eyesight began to fail, when his body begged for rest and his spirit pleaded for relief, he continued. Every morning the same ritual: Black coffee, hat on his head, leather on his shoulders, and the cattle call cutting through the dry air. It was as if he believed that if he stopped, the backlands would stop with him. The days blurred together, and time no longer made sense. The old cowboy no longer knew if it was Monday or Sunday. What he did know was that there was still work to be done. There always was. The corral, the fence, the sick calf, the limping horse. Nothing could wait. Rest, that was a luxury he had never known. Sometimes, sitting in the shade of the old umbu tree, he would look at the horizon and see the clouds forming in the distance. The wind would blow on his face, carrying the scent of rain that might never come. And, with a sigh, he would say to himself, "Time is a cunning creature. It runs for those in a hurry and drags along those who are already tired." And you, who are following this story, have you ever stopped to think about how many people live like this? They work, dream, fight, and end up forgotten by time itself. If this part touched you, comment below. Time does not erase those with a strong soul. I want to know how many still see beauty and pain in this kind of life that the modern world insists on leaving behind. Because, even tired, even alone, Antero still believed that the backlands held something for him. A final call. A promise that the wind has not yet carried away. Time, that ungrateful companion, passed over Antero like a gale tearing the leaves from an ancient tree, leaving only the bent trunk and the memory of what was once shade and shelter. The old cowboy now walked slowly, leaning on a piece of wood he himself had carved. His body, tired from so much work, seemed to creak with each step, and his gaze, once full of brightness, was now a reflection of a past that no one remembered anymore. The farm, the very one where he had dedicated almost his entire life, was no longer the same. The smell of tanned leather, the sound of the cattle horn, the clatter of the cattle, all had disappeared, replaced by the cold silence of the new fences and the distant noise of modern engines. The new owners were city folk, dressed in suits, speaking hurriedly, and with eyes that couldn't see beyond the numbers. They arrived with promises of change, with plans and nice words, but none of them carried the weight of truth. To them, Antero was just an old shadow, a piece of a time that was no longer useful. One day, they called him to the headquarters, and without looking him in the eye, told him that his services were no longer needed. They spoke of well-deserved rest, of retirement, but he knew what that meant: abandonment. He left without saying a word. His hat covered his face. His heart weighed more than his body. He walked to the corral, the same corral he had helped to build with his own hands, and stopped before the wooden gate. The wind blew, and the rustling of the leaves seemed to whisper his name, as if the backlands were trying to remind him that he was still there. He looked around and saw the oxen, few now, scattered across the pasture. He approached slowly, extended his hand, and spoke softly. "You can see that, right? Old Antero is still around. He still remembers each and every one of you." The animals drew closer, as if they understood every word. He smiled, a sad, tired smile, and ran his hand along the back of the oldest, the ox Sereno, his companion through so many cold dawns and scorching hot days. "You remember, don't you, old man, when we used to herd the cattle over by the stream? It was beautiful, wasn't it?" His voice was weak, but full of emotion. Sereno shook his head, and Antero discreetly wiped away a tear that threatened to fall. The following days were even more difficult. Without a job, without a routine, time seemed to stand still. He woke up at the same time as always, drank his black coffee, put on his leather jacket, and left home as if he still had work to do. He walked through the empty corrals, tidied the ropes, repaired what was already repaired. It was habit that kept him going. When the new, younger cowboys passed by him, they greeted him with a hurried wave, without imagining that this man, with his slow gait and trembling hands, was the same one who had once taught them most of the techniques they now used. Sometimes he would sit in the shade of the umbu tree and watch the activity on the farm. He observed the new foreman, a loud-spoken young man with an easy laugh, giving orders without knowing the name of a single animal. Antero would shake his head and murmur, "Today, the world moves too fast. Nobody wants to learn from time anymore, only from haste." At night, loneliness embraced him cruelly. The simple house that was once full of life now echoed with silence. The mud walls held Rosa's voice, the children's laughter, the sound of the wood-burning stove. Now, only the crackling of the wind through the cracks remained. He would sit in the rocking chair, light the lamp, and watch the flame dance, as if he could find some piece of what he had lost inside. Sometimes I would doze off and dream that I was still young, running after the cattle, with a light heart and a body full of strength. But upon waking, reality would come like a dry blow. The old cowboy came to be seen as a stranger in his own story. The village children, who once admired him, now called him the old man from the farm. Many didn't even know his name, and that's when the saying from the backlands came true. No one calls him by his name anymore. Only the wind still knows who he was. One day he went to the village to get some provisions. The new merchant served him without recognizing him. "Where do you work, young man?" the boy asked innocently, just out of curiosity. Antero was silent for a moment, looked at the ground and replied softly, "I've worked right here, my whole life." The boy just smiled, not understanding, and that hurt more than any insult. It was as if his existence had been erased from everyone's memory. He walked home slowly, his eyes brimming with tears, his heart aching. Each step seemed heavier than the last. That night, the wind blew differently. It was a cold, cutting wind, and it seemed to carry with it ancient voices. Antero, sitting on the porch, closed his eyes and listened to the distant sound of a cattle call. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. It was the backland speaking to him, reminding him that even forgotten by men, it was still part of the soul of that land. And this is where I ask you, my friend who is listening, how many people like Antero do you know? How many gave their whole lives for a job, for a cause, for a land, and, in the end, were left behind? If this part touched you, comment below. The wind still remembers. I want to see how many of you believe that. Even when the world forgets, the memory of the heart never dies. Because the old cowboy was still there, breathing the same dry air, gazing at the same horizon, unaware that destiny still held for him the most silent of encounters. That morning, the backlands awoke differently. The wind, which always blew warmly, was gentle, almost respectful, as if sensing something. The sky, a pale blue, seemed tired, and even the roosters crowing sounded softer. Antero, the old cowboy who had once been the heart of that farm, got up even before sunrise. His bones ached, his body felt heavy, but there was something in his chest that compelled him to move. He felt, he couldn't explain how, but he felt that this day would not be like the others. The coffee water steamed in the worn pot. He took a slow sip, savoring the strong, bitter taste that always accompanied him during his early morning work. His gaze swept over the walls of the house. Rosa's old portrait was still there, hanging crookedly, her smile almost erased by time. He carefully ran his finger over the frame and murmured, "Today I'm going to see you, my old lady, even if it's from up high." He picked up his hat, adjusted his leather jacket on his shoulders, and set off. The sun was beginning to rise timidly, streaking the horizon with a sad orange hue. The horse Sereno, as old as its owner, grazed slowly near the fence. When it saw Antero approaching, it raised its head and neighed softly, as if it knew what was coming. The cowboy smiled with a hint of longing on his lips. "Yeah, buddy, today it's just the two of us, just like in the beginning." With effort, he mounted. His legs trembled, his body protested, but his heart felt lighter. The leather creaked under the weight of time, and Sereno took his first steps carefully, respecting the rhythm of the man who had accompanied him all his life. With each meter traveled, Antero looked around. The empty corral, the simple house, the umbu tree that still stood firm, and the old fence that he himself had repaired so many times. Everything seemed quieter, as if the earth itself fell silent to hear him leave. He rode slowly, following the dirt path that led to the top of the hill. How many times had he made that journey? Thousands, perhaps. It was there that he took the cattle, where he rested his gaze after a hard day, where he dreamed of a future that never came. But that morning, each of Sereno's steps seemed like a farewell. The sound of the horseshoes on the dry ground sounded like the ticking of a clock, marking the end of a story. As he reached the top of the hill, the wind began to blow harder. Antero closed his eyes for a moment and let the warm air touch his face. He smelled the earth, the dust, the burnt brush. All of that was part of him, and he was part of it. He stopped for a moment and looked back. Down below, the farm lay, small, surrounded by memories. The main house, the corral, the dry river. Every corner held a piece of his life. He remembered Rosa, his children, his workmates, the bosses who had passed away, and those who remained. Some good, others ungrateful. So much changes, doesn't it, Sereno? She said, her voice trembling. But the ground remains the same. This ground knows us. The horse snorted, and the old man smiled. They continued climbing slowly. The sun was now high, but it seemed to be in no hurry to shine. They say that afternoon the sun bid farewell more slowly, as if the very backlands knew that a piece of it was leaving. From up there, the view was breathtaking. The wind blew strongly, raising dust and making his leather jacket flutter. Antero took off his hat, wiped his sweaty forehead, and closed his eyes. For a moment, everything returned. He saw himself young again, chasing after the cattle, laughing, shouting the cattle call that echoed throughout the valley. He saw Rosa waving at the door of the house, the little boys running in the yard, the sound of laughter mingling with the bird song. It was as if time had folded before him, showing him each memory, each piece of life that the backlands silently kept. The tears came without warning, silent, sincere. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude. He knew he had lived like few others. He had loved, worked, suffered, and endured, and deep down, he knew that the backlands recognized him, even if the world had forgotten his name. The wind picked up, bringing with it the distant sound of thunder. He looked up at the sky, and for the first time in a long time, saw a dark cloud forming on the horizon. He smiled. "Look, Rose, it looks like it's going to rain. You always said I'd leave when the backlands decided to get wet again, right? Well, it looks like the time has come." Carefully, he dismounted from his horse, knelt down, and picked up a handful of earth. He squeezed it between his fingers, feeling the warm dust trickle down his trembling hands. "This is where I belong," he thought. "This is where I lived everything I am." Sereno brought his snout closer, as if wanting to comfort his owner. Antero stroked the animal and rested his forehead against its neck. "Thank you, my old friend. You've been more loyal than many people out there." Silence filled the place. Only the sound of the wind and the distant ringing of a bell broke the emptiness. The old cowboy stood up, looked one last time at the horizon, and took a deep breath. That was the same sky that had accompanied him all his life, the same ground that had seen him born, the same wind that now seemed to want to carry him away. And you who are listening to this story, tell me, have you ever felt your heart clench, just imagining the moment when someone says goodbye to what they love? Comment below. The backlands never forget those who loved them. If you believe that certain loves, certain lives, are forever etched in the earth. Because, while the sun hid behind the mountains, Antero and Sereno remained there motionless, bathed in the golden light of dusk. Two old companions united by something that neither time nor oblivion could ever erase. The sun had already completely set when the backlands plunged into a profound silence. The wind, which had previously blown strongly, now moved lightly, dragging the dust across the dry ground as if trying to cover the marks of Sereno's horseshoes. High on the hill, Antero's body remained motionless, serene like the name of the horse that had accompanied him to the end. But at that moment, something seemed different. The entire backlands, which had so often been a stage for pain, struggle, and resistance, seemed to weep in silence. Not even the sound of crickets could be heard, only the rustling of leaves and the distant echo of the cattle call that the old cowboy had so often sung, a sound that now mixed longing and eternity. Time, that old master who spares no one, seemed to respect that moment. The clouds, which had been forming since early morning, now gathered over the hill, and a thunderclap cut through the sky with a force that made the ground tremble. The rain began to fall, gentle at first, then intense, as if the sky itself had decided to cleanse the soul of that land that held the body of a man who never gave up on dreaming. Each drop that touched the ground raised a strong scent of life, of wet clay, of new beginnings. It was as if the backlands, at last, were repaying the faith of one who loved it until his last breath. Down below, some residents saw the flash of lightning and swore they heard the sound of a cattle call echoing in the middle of the storm. "It's Antero," they said. "He's calling the cattle to heaven." Some smiled with teary eyes. Others made the sign of the cross. Because in the backlands, death is never just the end. It's passage, it's encounter, it's remembrance. And for those who lived life with a pure soul, the silence after the last breath is not emptiness, it's rest. In the following days, the sun shone again. The still damp ground was covered in green shoots. The old umbu tree, the one he himself planted when he married Rosa, was reborn with new leaves, more vibrant than ever. People said it was a sign of blessing that the cowboy had gone, but left something of himself in the world. And he was wearing a suit. Time takes the body, erases the traces of footsteps, but it doesn't erase the footprints of someone who lived truthfully. Antero could have been forgotten by men, but the backlands don't forget. It keeps the sound of his cattle call in the stones, in the trees, in the winds that cross the scrublands. A few months later, a boy from the village, curious and dreamy like Antero had once been, climbed the same hill. At the top, he found an old saddle, almost covered in dirt, and a leather hat dried by the sun. He took them to his father and asked, "Dad, whose was this?" The man looked at the pieces with respect and replied, "This belonged to old Antero, the best cowboy this land has ever known." The boy remained silent for a while, gazing at the horizon. Then, without quite understanding why, he began to whistle softly, imitating the sound of a cattle call he had never heard before, but which he seemed to have known forever. And for a moment, the wind blew stronger, as if approving of that gesture. That's how time works. It erases names from plaques, knocks down fences, takes away roofs. But some things remain. Examples remain, stories remain, echoes remain of those who lived with their whole hearts. Antero was one of those. A simple man, forgotten by men, remembered by the land. A man who had neither gold nor luxury, but had what few possess, truth. He needed neither monuments nor tributes. The backlands were his altar, and silence his eternity. Today, anyone passing by that farm feels something different in the air. They say that on windy afternoons, it's possible to hear the distant sound of a cattle call echoing through the valleys. Some say it's the wind hitting the rocks. Others swear it's Antero calling the cattle from heaven. Whatever the case, there's comfort in knowing that somehow he never truly left. Because those who live with an open soul, who love what they do and plant good in the land, never truly die. They become part of the earth, the air, the memory that time cannot erase. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson the old cowboy left behind. To live is to leave marks that even oblivion cannot erase. His hands no longer hold the lasso, but his example still captivates hearts. His body may have fallen silent, but the story continues to speak. In every corner of the backlands, in every cowboy born, in every simple man who wakes up early believing that sweat is sacred. Now stop for a moment and think with me. How many people like Antero have you met? People who gave their whole lives for something, a job, a family, a cause, and yet the world went on as if nothing had happened. How many names has time erased, but that the heart insists on remembering? If this story touched you in any way, if it brought tears to your eyes or a tightness in your chest, comment below. The sound of the cattle call never dies. I want to see how many still believe that the memory of the righteous is not lost to the wind, because in the end, my friend, time may take the body, but it never erases the footprints of those who lived truly. The old cowboy has indeed departed, but the backlands, that weeps and sings, still holds, in the depths of its silence, the eternal echo of Antero's cattle call.